here. So everyone, Daniela is LACE curator since 2016. She works between Los Angeles and Mexico, emphasizing contemporary art and curatorial practices that explore the politics and social issues of everyday life. She's part of the curatorial team of the Mexicali Biennale 2018 to 2019 and was recently awarded the Warhol Foundation Curatorial Research Fellowship. She served as project coordinator and contributing curatorial advisor for Below the Underground, Renegade Art in Action in the 1990s Mexico at the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena and Getty Pacific Standard Time LA initiative. In 2016, she worked with one of my favorite artists, Teresa Margolis, for her contribution La Sombra to the public art biennial Current LA Water. Thank you so much, Daniela, for being here. Feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Ty, too. Hi, everybody. I guess first, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional Tongva land that we are, most of us, and if you are not in that land, it will be nice to see in the chat if you know what is the traditional land that you are in. I want to recognize the Tongva people as the future, present, and past caretakers of this land that we are all sharing, now known as Los Angeles. And I want also to acknowledge that we also share this land with many displaced Native Americans and indigenous people from Latin America, El Caribe, and Oceania. Thank you to the Studio Art Program and Pepperdine University. And thank you all for being here in this virtual gathering. I always trick myself with here. So here in this virtual gathering, I want to start talking about my curatorial practice, first locating myself and talking a little bit about my context. I cannot go through everything because we don't have much time. Just also one quick question. Is 40 minutes talk, right? Or an hour? Hi.
Yeah, we can do, I was thinking like 45 minutes to an hour. It's loose.
Okay, cool. Just making sure I'm on the same page. So I am situated in Boyle Heights, which actually was called by the Tongvas Apachianga, which is in the east of Los Angeles. And I like to talk about this neighborhood because it really has embraced me. I have 7 years living here in Los Angeles, and before I live all my life, grew up in Mexico City. So it has been a very important place for me to construct my discourse and my practice coming here to Los Angeles. Boyle Heights is a historical space of resistance against racism, displacement, and erasure. It has been the core of the housing and anti-gentrification movement. And I am actually a member of the LA Tenants Union, which is an autonomous member-founded union that basically we are tenants and we are fighting for the human right of housing. And I specifically collaborate in the East Side local. We have locals in different areas of Los Angeles. And well, my practice is grass-rooted in social movements, and also it really fits from the context and from the surroundings. So that's why I'm explaining all this. And also, I come from a background that in Mexico, when I was studying arts, there was a strong revision of the history of contemporary Mexican art from the 60s to the 90s, which had never happened before, or there was a few things, a few revisions of that history, which is a very important influence for my practice. And I'm gonna mention a few things, and sorry, I can't explain each one because it would take me so much time, but at least it's important to name them. And one is like the student movement in the 60s in Mexico. Then in the 70s, there was a generation of Los Grupos, which it was a movement of artists collaborating in collective, like a big, really, really big movement of different collectives emerging and experimenting on the street and the social. And then the other thing is the indigenous movements in Mexico, Central America, and Latin America. And specifically, I have focused and studied the Zapatista movement on the south of Mexico that started in the 90s. Well, when I was like a teenager, I was like very influenced by that. And I think like the whole Mexican society. And I have had the fortune that to visit the autonomous territories of the Zapatistas and learn from them. And that has been also a very important school for me. So yeah, I'm interested in looking to social movements because they emerge out of the structures that we are always like, you know, I come from an academic background, but I wanted to get out of that very established structure. And my way to get out is like really looking into these social movements that also are important collective knowledge that exists there. And so, and that doesn't mean that I'm like glorifying every social movement or that I'm romanticizing it. I just think it's really important to look into that collective knowledge that you know there's failures and then there's different controversies around it. And yeah, I use it like as a tool, like as a resource of knowledge. And in the recent years, we have been seeing a very strong discourse about decolonization. And I really inscribe myself in that, more than being part of that, like just being active to try to decolonize my practice and yeah, my practice. Yeah, and then just like my very specific interest to indigenous movements is because they are basically the ones that have been holding the resistance since hundreds of years. So if we want to talk about decolonization, I think we need to look into these movements. I understand my collaborative curatorial practice as a space of constant testing, like experimenting and allowing myself to make mistakes, but also opening the space for others to experiment. I see it as a multidimensional practice, active in decolonization, a trans feminist practice that I will talk a little bit later more about it, but basically it's like building strategies and alliances in a very basic way. It's like a more deep concept. And my practice also looks for coalition and is in coalition, is experimental and open spaces. So now I'm gonna share my screen. So you just wanna like, you know, share my context because it's important for me to, yeah, like I also I'm trying to like break these binaries of like curator, professional, curator, career. You know, like my curatorial practice is an extension of my life. So I also want to recognize those experiences. Here. So this is a very important space for me in Los Angeles. I have been able to work in other places like the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena, and also like the Kate mentioned the project with Teresa Margolles. We did it on the Eco Park. So I have been able to do it to practice to have my practice in different places, but the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibition has been my home in the last 6 years. And if you don't know this place, you should come. We're opening actually very soon on May 15 by appointment. Unfortunately, it's not gonna be like this beautiful photo where everybody's gathering. It's gonna be a challenge for us. But also that's other important context for me that that has affected my practice, which is the legacy of Lace, which it was founded in 1978 by a diverse groups of artists, actually. So that's also an important thing to mention, that the artists were the ones that they founded this space, not the curators. And it was a very diverse group of artists, Chicano artists mainly, Harry Gamboa Jr., Gronk, Robert Hill de Montes, Nancy Jodelman, Patsy Valdez, and many others. And so we have more than 40 years of history. So also it's like a big commitment when you are there, you know, like recognizing this history. And of course, I have been learning a lot about it. Let me pass the next one. And this is just like a very small, did you see the whole slide? Yeah. So this is just like a few projects from the history of Lace. As I told you, 40 years it will be like crazy to try to summarize, but there are like things that always that I always like revisit. And you know, there's like also a big influence and connection and conversation with Latin America and Lace. And in the center, you can see there was a show in the 80s, I believe, with Jeffrey Balance, and he created the Richard Nixon Museum. And then in the front, you see all these like plastic masks. This was this other artist who creates the Museo Salinas, which was this president that, you know, sell the country basically to the United States. So it's like these moments that has been happening at Lace. That on the left side, I don't know if this is your left side, but that's the Ana Mendieta show, who was the first retrospective that was done after she was murdered. And then there's the Border Art Workshop, Destination LA show. And then these are photos of the Halloween party in the 70s. And this is a character from, he's a singer from a punk band called Gender Trouble. So just like in that context, that's where I have been able to, like, you know, do these testings. So I'm gonna talk to you about this show called Unraveling Collective Forms. And I just chose to focus on this one so you can see what I'm talking about when I'm saying multidimensional and transfeminist and like active in the colonization. I feel like you will, as you see how I built this show, maybe you can understand a little bit. So it's not that conceptual, it's more like actually active. So Unraveling Collecting Forms is a show that I did in 2019, and it was inspired by this artifact, which is now an artifact, but in in the Inca culture, this was a multi-sensory language, which was formed by notes, and it was and by colors. So here what you see, there's like a narrative, which is like really amazing. And basically Kipu means talking notes. So the artist, Chilean artist living in New York in exile for many years, Cecilia Vicuña, has been using the figure of the Kipu. And for me, it was very important to use this as a structure to build the exhibition, because basically it points out to vanished narratives. So when the Spanish came, they basically put on, like, born all of them, and there's a few ones that are, you know, in the Smithsonian or somewhere in Britain. Of course, they are not in Peru. So it's also, again, this like erasure. And Cecilia Vicuña used it, but in a very free way, and you know, like transpassing concepts of language and time. And then her body of work is very based on this, but also not only focusing in this ancient knowledge, but also addressing the clash between the Western and Andean world in that time. So she used it in a very poetic way. This is called Chancani Kipu, and as you see, it's on spoon wool, and it has like the language, like the Western language, which also it doesn't say anything. It's just like a, you know, a construction or a deconstruction. So this piece was the part of the facture of the show. That was like the first, the entrance of the show. So here you can see a little bit more about it. And I want to read just a little bit of, it's just like a small thing from Cecilia Vicuña, because she's also a poet. And also my practice is very inspired of using poetry. A poem in a space, a way to remember, involving the body and the cosmos at once. The artist's future are tracing from their own geographies and context. So the selection of artists are not only from Latin America, there are like different contexts, and I decided to use, you know, very, very different ones. So we can like really look into collective resistance and collective forms. So basically I was trying to knot together artistic reflections centered around collectivity, autonomy, and group manifestations that crack the system. And when I say crack the system, like that, try to break the system. This is, I won't have time to explain each artwork, but I'll just mention that this is a wonderful installation by Mercedes Dorame, who is a Tomba artist, and who also is very interesting because there's so little information about her ancestors, and she also is in charge of, like, when there's like a burial, she like goes there and recognize and take the elements. So she used that knowledge to reimagine her traditions. So all these photographs that she builds in the landscape, actually this very last one is in Malibu. So this is a whole like reimagination, which is very interesting, because it's totally the opposite of archaeology or like an anthropologist. you can see here better. That's like cinnamon that she used it. And for example, that is like a very specific cultural symbol, but she just used it because the color resembles the color of the specific lands that she works on. And I'm very interested in this like breaking things moments of artists. Here you can see there's salt. These like stars are reproductions of stars that she has found in buried sacred places. And like the thread is just her own, like it's her own elements. This is a picture of Harry Gamboa Jr., a photograph related with the Sixth Expanse Bridge in Boyle Heights. And it's like a series of photographies. For me, it was important to show this one where everybody was holding this bridge that was demolished a few years ago, and now their developers are building a giant monster across the river, and it's gonna cause a lot of, like, again, displacement and gentrification. So this is how I really like to build the spaces in a way that also many things can happen inside the exhibition, and I'm gonna show you. And some of this artwork also were created in collaboration with the audience. This is an artwork by Carolina Caicedo. They were 100 portraits of environmentalist women, and she called it from the series of my female lineage of environmental resistance. So again, this is like a very interesting way to address, and that I align with this practice of like building your own genealogy, bringing different things together, and to kind of like grassroots. This is her, and this was part of the exhibition. So most of the artwork have like an action or like an activity around it to complement each other. And here what she did, it was called Oral Histories of Environmental Resistance. And she invited this collective called East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice to share their stories. They are from East LA, and in that there's like specific areas that are very contaminated neighborhoods that, the government just use it as trash land, but people lives there. So this is like a very interesting activist group, and that is multi-generational. And it was really amazing because they were just sharing their histories of life. And this was a teenager. She was like 16-year-old, and she was really, really amazing. So talking about social movements and collective knowledge, oral histories are a very important element in my practice too. And then during the talk we gave, Carolina gave like a piece of cord to everybody, and then she asked to react to what they were telling, like doing knots. And yeah, and this one was like our collective kipu made after that activity. This is other part of the show. This is two artists from Puerto Rico, one living here in Los Angeles, and Jorge, Monica lives here, and Jorge lives in Puerto Rico. And it was like a collaboration, was called A Dangerous Foreigner. And it was inspired about this anarchist and feminist writer and theorist, Luisa Capetillo, and she was in the 70s very interested in the tobacco factories. While people were rolling tobacco, she will educate them. Well, not educate them. She will like read to them, and it was like a pedagogical test that she was doing, and it was in the moment that there was a lot of union labors. So I'll just show you this. One of the events that they did was called Libertarian Essays, and we use the Spanish. And if you see this part called Mainoc, that's Tongva. Yeah, this was a very, very, very special moment because they were trying to weave together very different type of knowledge. Jorge, on one side, he has been studying a lot of art craft from the island, and which is also disappearing because of capitalism. And then on the other side, Monica has this specific research about this anarchist woman that was doing a lot of labor work, and this listening practice and reading practice. She was like trying to do that. And at the same time, we invite Julia Bogani, who she's sitting here in this table. Unfortunately, Julia actually passed away a few days ago. And she was an awesome Tongva educator. She really researched and rescued and was working in the rescue of the language, because it just has been erased, that even she that was very involved in this, she wasn't able to talk Tongva. She has been doing a lot of studies. And yeah, unfortunately, she's still with us, and I think we should keep honoring her work. You should look, if you are interested in her work, Julia Bogani. But here she was like teaching us some traditional weaving from the Tongva traditions. And there was all this like different knowledge in one moment. And it was really, it sounds like very complex, like Puerto Rico, Tongva, but there's very specific, I think like the reason that was able to function this is because all these actions are very important methods of resistance, and they can like, dialogue together. And, there was like a group of people, and this was inside the exhibition, that we were doing the readings while we were weaving the different techniques, the different materials from the island, and also from here, where Julia was able to like collect specific materials. And this is also part of the show, and I'm just gonna move a little farther. There were many pieces. This was a talk with Sayak Valencia, and she's a philosopher from Mexico, but she specifically works in Tijuana, which is, like it's a very important voice, because usually all the academics and all the artists come from Mexico City, where it's like, it's like a very cosmopolitan city, and we have access to so much stuff. And the opposite with Tijuana is, it's a border city that has historically been going through many crises, and the border has, like makes the living very difficult there. There's a lot of violence, there's a lot of precarity, but at the same time, there is so much new discourses coming from there, and new art. And it's just like the form of living in a border, like being trans border, is like a very interesting mode of life and mode of practice that I'm really interested in. And as you see here again, it's like there was like happening inside the exhibition. After Sayak, Patrice Couleurs, she did this beautiful performance. She is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and but also she's an artist. And then on the other side, it's Demian Dinejasi, who is an artist, indigenous artist from Portland, from the Navajo group, and Holland Andrews, who is also from Portland. They made a very interesting performance. Just forget the name. An Infected Sunset, and it's a poem that they wrote about when the Orlando nightclub shooting happened, and then in the midst of Standing Rock. And it's like a really awesome performance. The book exists if you want to check it. So just like these two are performance. So also like for Lace has a huge history of performance, and I also like try to bring that practice into my curatorial projects, which is very interesting because here in Los Angeles there's a lot of artists working on performance, and in Mexico it's like a discipline that people doesn't like it. It's not good. But well, that's a whole thing. And before, I'm gonna show you a video to make it a little bit more dynamic. If you have any question, please tell me. I just want to read this quote of Sayak Valencia, who I was talking about, because she makes this very interesting proposal that I feel like I'm very interested in use it as a methodology and as a way of perspective. So it's here, and I'm just gonna read it because it's very, very specific. And this is what transfeminist perspective, and just a little bit of context. She's coming from also studying all the white feminists, which is an important contribution for the work, but also studying the Latino, the Chicanas, the Black feminists. So she has like all this like perspective, and she's reclaiming a space. So she proposed this, a transfeminist perspective understood as an epistemological tool that does not merely include transgender discourse within feminism, nor suggest overcoming feminism, but as a network that considers stages of transit, migration, mestizaje, vulnerability, race, class, and gender, and articulates them with the historical memory of social uprisings, to open up space and discursive fields to all of the practices and subjects of our contemporary moment, to the minoritarian becoming that are not directly taken into account, but institutional hetero-white biologicist feminism. So I very interested in this like articulation of different discourse and working together. And I just think like isolating a concept or working in a specifics can be very, can be very dangerous, because you just isolate and are not in conversation. So I feel like my practice is like that, and many of the practice of these artists that I show you is working on that, on articulating a network. And I'm going to show you this video. How am I on time? That was the first performance. So we open Unraveling Collective Forms with this performance by Arsha.
اللهم اغفر لحينا وميتنا وشاهدنا وغائبنا وصغيرنا وكبيرنا وذكرنا وأنثانا اللهم من أحييته منا فأحيه
Hope you were able to hear, right? Okay. Just want to pause it here. Yeah, this was called, this performance by Arsha Haq was called Ajnabi Milan, which is in Urdu. one of the language of India, and it means a stranger's union. And she was doing a direct reference with the idea of immigration and alienation. And she called it like a surrealist, situationist performance. And it was a procession of mainly by people and artists from the Swana diaspora. Swana is Southwest Asia, North Africa diaspora, and basically the performance was addressing alienation and inclusivity. It was a very interesting performance because what they were holding, it was like two signs, one in Urdu, and that usually just pass as Arab, and then it just gets, into all this like discrimination, prejudge, and it means I was a stranger and you welcome me. That's what it says on which is also a phrase from the Bible, and it was very interesting that she decided to use it coming from like a Muslim perspective, and she wanted, to talk to the immigrants that are around in Los Angeles, to the people that constantly alienate immigrants, and it was just like a procession that it didn't need to explain too much. It was just like a moment that happened, and it was like a collective strategy. So that's how it opened, unraveling collective forms with them coming inside the gallery. And I'm just gonna show you very quickly some images from the Mexicali Biennial just to arrive to other point. I was saying that my practice is also collaborative. So this was, the Mexicali Biennial is just like a project, again, founded by artists, and artists from Los Angeles and artists from Tijuana and Mexicali, that they wanted to have a broader conversation without institutions and among the region that divide us with the border. And I had the fortune to work with them from 2018 to 2020, and we have different shows, one in San Bernardino, Cal State University. We have a night of performance at Lace, and then we went to Mexicali, which is like, it's a very interesting place because Tijuana, I was saying like Mexico City becomes like the art center, and then Tijuana gets, relegated. And then Tijuana becomes the art center of the border, and Mexicali, which is on the other side, becomes like, negated, invisible totally. So it's like these constant layers that we put in. And then this was a show in a market in Mexicali. And there was like these pre-Hispanic figures that an artist reproduced, and they were on the same context of other clothing and other toys. I'm just gonna show you this. So basically the Mexicali, we were elaborating around the myth of Calafia, who was a Black woman warrior that ruled the island of California, and is a myth from Spain. When they arrived here, they were like, writing and doing literature, and we just use that as a form, even if it comes from the Spanish colonizers. We give that to the artist to break it and reinterpret it in different ways. And then this happened in the border. There was two cones, one on the side of Mexico and then on this side of the US, and they were sending messages from one side to the other side. Basically on the other side, on the US, there's nothing. So it was just two artists and our team. And it's also this very interesting, you see here, the border is right here and the city starts right there. And on the other side of the United States, there's like miles until the city really starts. So it's like a, you know, like a very complex context. And I'm just gonna finalize here on jumping just in a project that I'm working on and that is opening on May 15, because I just wanna invite you. I won't say a lot because it's also a huge project that I have been doing research after being here and being in a very direct context with the border of the United States and Mexico, and working with the Mexicali Biennial, and also reading about the Zapatistas in the south of Mexico. They were, when Trump was gonna be elected, they were saying, we need to pay attention not only in the wall that he's gonna build between Mexico and the US. We need to look into the border in the south border of Mexico, because that's where there's gonna be way more violence, because we have the Central America community escaping from violence, coming to the United States. So I decided to start a research looking into also the border of the South and looking into Central America as also a source of resource, because Los Angeles is one of the cities that has so many community from the diaspora of Guatemala, El Salvador, and it's almost invisible. And I don't know if you were aware of the PST, that it was like Latin America, Los Angeles. I think there was only one show about Guatemala. So it was just very important to me to look into Central America. And Intergalactics Against Isolation, Contra el Aislamiento, which this against isolation, I was actually even thinking it before, since 2018. And you know, now we were in all this situation, and it's again building network, and extending, understanding the diasporas, and starting to have conversations also with Central America and recognizing their you know, their presence here in the United States. And we're gonna have different artists. The Fire Theory is a collective from El Salvador. And this is a very interesting piece about the kids on the cages here in the United States. And actually that's one of the things that actually makes me start thinking about this project, how kids were isolated in these cages. And just to finalize, I want to invite you next April 6th, we are actually presenting one of the projects of Intergalactics. And it's a project that has been built between a collective called Cachay Molojov, which is a group of Mayan caciqueles from Guatemala who are researchers, along with Fiebre Collective, which is a collective from Mexico, Beatriz Cortez, who is a Salvadorian famous artist here in LA. So they have been collaborating in this project, and we're gonna talk about it in April 6th. I'll send you the info. But I'll just leave it there because I also wanna know if you have questions. I wanna talk with you. Let me go and stop sharing. Okay.
Right. right, thank you so much, Daniela. Does anybody have any questions?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of the works that you've shown are based on social justice issues. Have you seen like what kind of impact the art has had towards progressing those issues, such as like I think one of your examples was the environmentalists. Have you seen like has there been any progress made towards like helping those people?
So the work of Carolina Caicedo, well, I guess first I should say, like, even if some of these works talk specific about social justice, I don't see the art as the vehicle of resolve this. I think it of course is like contributing, and it's an open space to have discussion and to bring different people from different arenas to talk. And I think that's what it has helped. For example, these people that you mentioned, the teenager and the two persons, it has become a collaboration between Carolina and them, and they are like very actively demanding, and they have their own projects going on. So for them, being in the gallery was like a way of also being more visible and build collaboration with Carolina. Yeah. And now you know about them, and it's just, yeah. I don't know if that answered the specific question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I don't want to take a time away from students, but I have a sort of maybe a quick question. I don't know. Danielle, how did you come up with the title Intergalactics? Like, I'm interested in that sort of sci-fi reference, or so that's where I go. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Intergalactics come from a specific reference from the Zapatistas, because in the 90s, I think it was 1996, after they uprising arms, and it was the Mexican government tried to devastate them, but they were able to communicate to the whole world, and that's why they call it the cyber guerrilla. They called for an encounter or a gathering intergaláctico, so an intergalactic gathering, and they were calling for everybody in the world and outside the galaxy to come and join and fight against capitalism and neoliberalism. So it comes from there, and I put at the X, thinking, in gender, and the gender movement. So it does, that the Zapatista movement is very interesting because it does have a lot of like fiction and poetry, and then they like weave all this in. It becomes like a very playful movement that not necessarily has like a very like theory, even it's also very like Marxist and has also this influence, but first is these narratives, fictional narratives. Yeah.
It's a great title. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I got more. But I'll wait a minute. I'll wait a minute.
I know. It's also I share a lot. Sorry, I always tend to share a lot, and I also recognize silence is also processing. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going. I'm doing it. Daniela, we have a whole program of artists who want to make a difference in the world. I was wondering, since you're located physically in Boyle Heights, and you've seen galleries coming in there and how the role that galleries have played in gentrification there, but then also other artist groups who are maybe trying to do, other educational elements in that area, or all sorts of stuff. How can like young artists get involved in, we'll keep it in Boyle Heights. Like how can they sort of get plugged into a place like that? That sort of, and I guess like sort of has those two different poles, this sort of like gallery system, more capitalist pole, and then maybe like the sort of educational side of that spectrum. Do you have any perspective on like what's going on in that neighborhood and how young artists might be able to get involved? Because I think a lot of times they just see the gallery side because that's more visible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very controversial, like the galleries, and but I think let me see how I can respond. I guess like one thing is and also like maybe looking back into Lace as a group of artists starting a space, which was a different time, right? And I think I really believe there's so much organizations and also autonomous groups of young people doing, like community art projects, and they don't necessarily inscribe in one or the other. So I would say like kind of joining or just even getting to know those kind of projects that are outside of our art world, which is what you were saying. That's right. We are more familiar with galleries, and but I feel like once you start getting involved in specific arenas, I mean, for me, my point of access was Unión de Vecinos, which is the East Side local of the LA Tenants Union. And it's a group that has been fighting for anti-gentrification since the 90s, but I would say also like if for artists, it's just important, like just like the exercise that I did in the beginning of where I am located, what's around me, it's doing that research can give you access to see other things. I feel like that's very, very important, because we are like so against this thing of against isolation. We are so isolated in our own disciplines, in our own work, that we don't see what is happening out there. And sometimes we just think that we are doing a really awesome project, but we haven't realized that 2 blocks away there's like families being displaced. So I think that's the part, like kind of situating yourself and recognizing what's around you. I don't know if that's exactly an answer. Yeah.
No, I think that makes total sense. I think it's a great answer.
And also that doesn't mean that like, like like I'm not against galleries or art spaces, of course, because I work in one. But I think it is constantly so a good exercise is constantly checking ourselves, no, like being autocritic of what we are doing, and because it's very easily to fall in the big structure, and artists like you are actually trying to break the structure. So I think like constantly questioning the space or our actions or the actions, and also questioning not necessarily in a contestive, how do you say, contestation, like confronting way, but like you can make a space to dialogue and have those questions.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I know we've got some one-on-ones planned. Do you want to take a quick break before diving into that, Daniela, or would you rather just go right to it?
Yeah, I'll just take like a 5 minutes
Okay.
break. So should I just come back? It will just be in the same channel.
Yeah, we'll do breakout rooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you all. See
Thank
you
you.
later. Come to Lace. Come to visit Lace. Inscribe in our newsletter.